Hey Void, welcome to my favorite books of 2024 YouTube edition. My name is Sonia. I like to read weird, creepy, and disturbing books, although the true horror of this video is how many times I have tried to film it and absolutely failed. If I have to do it one more time, I am going to scream, so let's just agree to accept it for whatever it is and we'll troubleshoot with the other ones. This is my trust fall moment. You guys have to catch me. And yes, this is incredibly late, but even without all the complications of trying to figure out how to film for YouTube, the one thing you can never expect from me is good time management. I read about 100 books in 2024. That is a guess, mostly because I've learned that I can't do something as simple as take the title of a book I just finished and put it in the notes section of my phone so I can keep track of what I'm reading. So I'm sure we lost some titles along the way. I'll regret that later. But even though this is a rough guesstimate, I think this is what we're working with. Starting with 13 Stories by Jonathan Sims, and this is in no real order. I am just picking up books randomly from my floor. That's where most of my books live. This is all a lie. It's a pretty lie, but it's not how I live. You might already be familiar with Jonathan Sims through the Magnus Archives, which I think is the best piece of horror media. If you don't know what it is, it's a podcast, go listen to it. And similar to the Magnus Archives, 13 Stories tells a larger, interconnected narrative about a haunted house through a series of short stories. Each of the stories introduces you to a new resident of Banyan Court and their specific relationship with the entity that's haunting it and their specific fear. So one resident might be dealing with a really creepy ghost girl with very sharp teeth. Another might be getting obsessed with rot and decay, but all of the stories circle around each other and slowly piece together the mystery of what's happening. Some of the stories might be a little bit more horrific and chilling than others, but I think they all have a very menacing and sinister vibe that will thoroughly creep you out. The Color of Blood by Kabbani is the only book that can make cutting somebody's head off one of the most beautiful things you're ever going to read. This follows an artist named Void who likes to paint with the color of people's souls, and they become mesmerized by a color they've never seen before, and that obsession leads them down a path of some pretty extreme horror that ends in severed jawbones, mangled pieces of flesh, and so much blood. This twisted little thing is going to submerge you in so much viscera and gore, but it's so hypnotic and beautiful, you're kind of going to be thankful for it. There Is No Antimemetics Division by Quantum is probably one of the most unique books I've read in general, not just in 2024, but it follows a government agency that is trying to fight an apocalyptic threat that erases itself from your memory the second that you remember it exists. It's wild. This is definitely more sci-fi with cosmic horror elements, but when the horror hits, it hits so hard. No other book has made me feel so small and insignificant and terrified of the scope of the world. Plus, it's super fun and very weird. And I do mean weird. I didn't know what was going on for half of this book, and I don't know if that was intentional or if the writer was getting lost in their own narrative, but I really don't need to know what's going on. I was here for the vibes. The Devil Thinks I'm Pretty by Charlene Elsby is a disorienting spiral that will leave you hunched over in a fetal position. It follows a troubled teenager who might be getting lost in her dark delusions, or she might be getting possessed by the devil, and the journey of trying to figure out what is going on slowly tears you apart before the ending completely destroys you. I will say this is a slow burn. It is very intentional in making you sit with the heavy discomfort of knowing something awful is going to happen. You just don't know when or why or what. The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim follows a young woman who's in a really dark and bad place in her life, which so relatable. Who doesn't feel like they're screaming in a vast empty void right now? But she decides to channel all of her rage and frustration onto her mother's new awful boyfriend, specifically onto his eyes. And while this does have unhinged, good for her vibes with amazing body horror, it's about so much more than just being disturbing. If you're into slow psychological suspense that really focuses on how societal pressures, misogyny, and racism can make somebody crack, you have to pick this up. I know I'm gonna lose some of you with this next one, but that is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. I know, people have some really big negative feelings, but I sat down to read 1 or 2 chapters and melted into my couch with the need to know what was happening. This follows the soul survivor of a seemingly cursed college horror movie as it's made into a feature film, and it's so weird and tense and gets progressively more disturbing as you piece together what's happening. And I like this for all of the reasons most people don't like it. I like that all the characters are awful. I really like these script elements, even though they're not written like a script's supposed to be. I don't care. I really like that it's ambiguous and that it's kind of slow and boring, because it's also somehow one of the most fascinating things I've read. The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw is a brutal and gruesome Little Mermaid retelling where mermaids have sharp teeth and claws, and not all princes have good intentions. This has weird kids and creepy villages and plague doctors and so much visceral body horror. It is so wet and squishy and goopy in the best ways. I know a lot of people think this is overwritten and pretentious, but I think the vibes are immaculate, and I would be dragged through broken pieces of glass for the opportunity to stay in this twisted, broken nightmare of a world. But that's me. We can't all know what a fun time is. Wounds by Nathan Ballingrud makes horror feel real. Like I can walk to the subway and encounter something truly terrifying and not make it home, or find a discarded book that's really a hellish portal to another dimension. And who doesn't like the idea of something awful happening to them? It's a collection of six short stories that explores how hell can slither in and infest the real world, and it's so brutal and gory and vivid and imaginative, filled with genuinely creepy moments, and it's the book that convinced me that I might maybe like short story collections. Heavy emphasis on the maybe. I really don't know why I struggle with them. Maybe because they all just feel like a tease, but if there's a short story collection you think I would like, pop it in the comments. I am always on the hunt for the next book that is going to completely shatter me as a human being, and then when I find it, I just curl into a ball and curse the author, and that is exactly my experience with House of Bone and Rain. This slowly cuts you open with such vivid descriptions of violence and trauma and loss, but it's so much more than a simple story of revenge. This is a story of myths and magic and folklore. It's a story about how a community is shaped by gang violence and poverty, but most of all, it's a story of 5 friends who will travel down the darkest paths to help each other. And it's really that emotional weight that carries the story forward. Yes, it's gruesome and brutal and will crush you, and I say that as really good things, but what really sits in your stomach and weighs you down is the brutal reality that these 5 men have to grow up and exist in. If you're somebody who likes to curl up in a blanket before collapsing on the floor in a heap of despair, you have to read Model Home by River Solomon. This is a haunting, fever-dreamy look at identity and loss through the lens of a haunted house. It's a haunted house, but it's not a haunted house. This is more about how our past pains and failures and traumas can shape who we grow up to be. And if you're somebody who has ever struggled with not feeling good enough, self-acceptance, or self-identity, I cannot explain how much this book is going to resonate with you. That's it for my favorite books of 2024. There seemed to be a general theme of weird sadness, which I hope follows me into 2025. But if you're into weird, creepy, and disturbing books, I hope you follow along as I see what other dark books I can find.